Oh, hi! This week, I promise this is the last A-line skirt we're doing for a long time. Also, I assure you this one is different than the others and is finally actually the cut I wanted to duplicate when I saw this post by Rachel Maksy. So spoiler alert, it goes okay, and I'm very, 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 very proud of myself for this one. But obviously, it took a lot of work to get here. Also, whenever I wear this hat, I feel like George Clooney in A Perfect Storm. Not that he even wears one this color, it just makes me feel like a curmudgeonly fisherman. So, I was specifically saving this fabric for this skirt because it's a nice drapey flannel. It's not stiff or thick, but also not too droopy or anything. It's just the perfect amount of body for what I need for this project. So I kind of took a gamble with what fullness of the skirt I was gonna cut because we're basically cutting out a circle skirt panel, but I knew I didn't have enough fabric to get a full circle skirt, so that was one factor. But also I think a full circle skirt would have been too much volume for what I was going for. I think it would have had too many folds and looked weird without like a petticoat under it, and I didn't want something big and floofy like that. So yeah, went right in with a half circle skirt pattern. Okay, so yes, you could probably try to do the math on your own, but that hurts my brain in a very big way. I just use the Omni calculator for circle skirts. I'll put it in the description. It's never led me astray. It includes seam allowance, so that's what I go for. You enter your waist measurement and what fullness of circle skirt you want, so like quarter, 3/4, half, or full. It'll tell you how big of a radius you need to mark for your waist. So I folded my fabric in half once, and because it's a plaid, I made sure everything was straight, but also wanted to pick what color was going to be the center front line. So I thought going with a yellow would be nice. Took my time lining everything up, and all I cut for the pattern, because I wasn't sure what length this was going to be, and I was going to have to do other stuff to get the hem sorted out anyway. When I trace the radius, normally it's the bottom chunk of the pattern that I take, but I just took the negative space, we'll call it, and traced that line because it was just less cumbersome than taking a giant sheet of paper and laying it out on top when I was only using that inner curve anyway. I did want to even out the bottom a little bit so it was easier to line things up as I was going through the project and reduce any weight that I could. So I went a little rogue cutting across the bottom. This is just to get any excess off, but there was zero precision in this. I just kind of eyeballed the shape here, so I don't recommend following what I did. It worked out fine, but ill-advised. That got me my skirt panel. Then it was time to make a waistband, and I just used the scraps that I just cut off to make it. I did end up having to do it in 3 pieces. I meant to line up the plaids a little better, but I completely spaced out while I was doing this configuring and started thinking about Puffs the play, because why wouldn't I be thinking about Puffs the play? I'm a very spoiled bean, and I got to actually see that when it was off Broadway in New York City with one of my best friends, and it was a glorious evening. But there's a local theater doing a production of it, and I really want to go see it, and I'm accidentally in appropriate colors for this conversation to be happening. So I didn't want a huge waistband for this, but I also had to work within the parameters of the scraps that I had, so I went with a 2-inch width. The pattern piece I made was my waist measurement, which is 33 inches, cut in half, so that's 16.5, because I'm going to use this pattern piece on fold, but I'm adding 1/2 inch to this for seam allowance, so total of 17 inches by 2 inches. Once the front panel was cut, I should have paid more attention to where the center line was, but thankfully I got it to line up anyway. But again, just think about puffs. Since I had to kind of jerry-rig the waistband together, the other 2 pieces I cut, I also added additional seam allowance to those because I wasn't able to cut it on the fold. Basically need to account for seam allowance on both sides of these smaller pieces, but one is included in the pattern piece and one was not, so that's why I'm kind of cutting outside the lines. Okay, then it was time to piece the waistband together. Since the only seam on this skirt is going to be the center back, because I hate side zippers, we're not fucking with that. The way I assembled the waistband is I took the long piece and used that as the front, and then I attached the short pieces to each end of the long piece, and that made my back half. So the waistband has some side seams and the back center seam, but the skirt itself doesn't have any side seams, which does mean I don't have pockets for this because I don't want to add patch pockets, so this may be a pocketless skirt, and I hate to say it. I could have interfaced the waistband pieces before I attached them together, but this took just as much effort. Then I serged one of the long edges of the waistband, and it wasn't till after I ran it through the machine that I realized I hadn't changed the thread color. I just didn't even notice. It wasn't out of stubborn laziness this time. It was in fact just zero awareness of my surroundings. So I did change the thread color for the rest of the skirt. This one's going to be hidden inside. It's fine. Then once the thread color was changed, I serged the short ends of the waistband. Then I notched the center front of the waistband on the unserged edge, and thankfully those side seams of the waistband are going to work as my quarter points. So I also notched the center front of the skirt panel and then did make notches at the quarter points. So I knew where to line everything up, and you can make as many notches as you need. This amount usually does the trick for me. Then I lined up those notches with the top of the skirt going to the unserged edge of the waistband, pinned in a couple spots because we're working with every direction of the fabric because of the way that the skirt was cut. So there's some parts that are going to have more stretch because of the bias and some that won't have as much. So I really tried to not over handle the skirt panel so it didn't get all warped and stretched out and everything. I suppose I could have done some stay stitching. That probably would have been smart. As soon as I cut the panel, I suppose I can be more mindful of that next time I cut a circle skirt. Is that standard practice? Probably, because I feel like when I cut necklines, any pattern I use tells me to stay stitch anything that has a curve, where if you don't know, stay stitching is basically just a protective stitch to try not to warp the entire fabric in situations like this. Okay, once the waistband is attached, I then take my iron and press that seam up into the waistband. Because there's a curve happening here, you gotta kind of go a little slower, where if you're doing a straight gathered skirt or something, this part you don't have to be as precious with, but I wanted to make sure I wasn't getting any like puckers or creases along the way and that it was going evenly. Then I folded the waistband in half and pressed along the long edge. I should have done that before I attached it because it would have been easier to know where the halfway point is, but I just flipped the waistband under and pinned it in some spots so it was all nice and even. I had good lines going across the top as far as the plaid went, and I made sure that serged edge of the waistband was below where that seam from where the other side of the waistband got attached to the skirt is like above it. So I want the flappy serged edge to be a little bit below, because when we sew it from the front, I want it to catch. This is the easiest way for me to do waistbands. I do this for pretty much everything I'm making a waistband for. There are certainly other more professional finishes you can have on the inside where none of the edges of the waistband are showing. Everything's like tucked in, but especially because nobody's gonna see this except you when you're putting it on. That is something I don't feel like is worth the extra effort. Even though this is another project where I'm whole assing the thing, this is a step where like that effort wouldn't have any actual payoff for me, so I just don't bother with it. Anyways, once that was pressed in half and was holding its shape and I had a nice crisp line, I steamed the shit out of it. I unfolded the waistband, lined up the back seam, so along the waistband all the way down to the bottom of the skirt. Now I knew the bottoms probably weren't going to line up because of how haphazardly I cut everything out at the beginning. So thankfully this is a plaid, so I was able to line up everything evenly along the back seam. And listen, speaking of whole assing, I sewed this seam together and thought I had done sufficient pinning, but because I didn't have a walking foot and things can move under your machine, the lines were a little bit off and I really wanted this to look good. And I knew it was going to bother me and maybe make me not want to wear this skirt once it was done. So I unpicked it and hand basted everything together so that there was no chance of the fabric moving where I was attaching everything. I just need you to know how deep in the paint I'm going for this project. So this is where the zipper is gonna go. I lined up the top metal bits of the zipper with the fold of the waistband and then measured down the length of the zipper and marked where that metal stopper at the bottom ended. So everything from that point to the waistband got the longest stitch I have on my machine, which is a 4. And I back tacked at that point, and the bottom of the skirt where the zipper isn't gonna be, and this is like the finishing seam stitch, that got my standard like 2.5 on my machine for a stitch length. Okay, so for zipper installation, I press the seam open, I lay the zipper back down again with the metal stops at the top, right where the fold of the waistband is. I also kind of tapered the tops towards the rest of the waistband so they were folding out of the way, because sometimes it kind of flops out and I just want that shit out of my way. So then I once again hand basted this into place. I tried so hard to make this project look good, and this is stuff y'all have told me, like, I know it's a pain in the ass, but it's worth the effort. And you're right, this has been the biggest difference in my zipper installation, is just basting into place ahead of time. Once that was basted in, I went over with my machine, I put my zipper foot on, and I stitched down one side to where the stopper is at the bottom of the zipper. And then a thing I used to do, because it's what I did at one of my old jobs, is I would like go down the zipper one side and then pivot the skirt, go across the bottom of the zipper, and then come back the other direction, and that always made things just that little bit wonky and drove me berserk. I can't remember who told me, it's been a couple years now, but someone was like, I'm sorry, did you go different directions on your zipper? That's probably causing all of your issues. So that has also helped. When I say I'm thankful for the input from y'all, I mean it, because you have bettered my sewing more than even my own trial and error has. So went down one side, readjusted the zipper foot, and then came down the other side of the zipper, and then did a little bit of very slow stitching across the bottom of the zipper past the metal stopper. Do not let your needle go near that thing or you will be in Shatter City, and I hate it and it upsets me and is traumatic every time. Once I got this method down of installing a zipper, it's just so much less scary than I used to think it was, because you're just top stitching and the zipper foot is there for you. There's not this flipping thing I used to do. It used to be much more involved, but hand basting it and then just doing this one bit of stitching around the edge has simplified so much of my life. Then I went in with my seam ripper and I unpicked all of those basting stitches along the zipper so that we can, you know, open it. And I just made sure not to undo anything below the zipper stop where I did the back tacking, and started the smaller stitches down the rest of the back seam. So double check that the zipper was fully functional. I mean, I tested the zipper before I started. That's a great bit of advice I got, is no matter how many times you have previously touched your zipper, before you put it in anything, make sure it zips and unzips. And I also like to check at this point, because this is where it'll be easier to replace it if I need to, or adjust something if I like put the stitches too close to the teeth and it can't close or whatever. Now's the time to problem solve that. Once all that was unpicked and I got every little thread from the back there, it was time to fold the waistband down and top stitch it from the front. So this is called stitch in the ditch, and I put the needle right in that seam where the waistband and the skirt is attached from the front side. And that's what I mean by catching that serged edge underneath. Because I'm sewing from the top side, I don't have to guess if it's actually catching or not, because I made sure it's kind of overhanging a little bit. And once that was done, I did a little test fit to make sure everything was okay, and it is hanging exactly like I hoped. This is where I realized, like, yes, a half circle skirt with this specific type of fabric, like weight of fabric, is exactly what I needed to get the shape that I wanted. A couple of calm waves rolling through the sea of plaid, where if this was a full circle skirt, there'd be twice as much of this and it would just look too heavy. So then I even let the skirt hang. I just put it on my dress form, because obviously I wasn't gonna just stand in the middle of a room for 24 hours to let the hem fall wherever it was going to. And especially for circle skirts, this is helpful. And I have shot myself in the foot by not giving it this wait time before, where because some of the parts are cut on the bias and that has more stretch, if you let it hang, any discrepancies that will present themselves as far as the bottom of your skirt will work themselves out if you let it sit for like a day or two. I think the rule of thumb for this is like, the fuller the circle skirt, the longer you should let it hang. I intended to just let this go overnight, but we got a blizzard where we got 18 inches of snow. That was my entire weekend, so it got more like 72 hours. Where I don't think that was necessarily necessary. That's not a good way to use words. I don't think it was essential. Overnight probably would have done it. So then it was time to bring in my old friend Vince Noir, my dress form. And when I put the skirt on the dress form to start with, I made sure it was positioned as evenly around the waist at the top as I could. So as it was hanging and as I was working on the bottom, it wasn't going to be like drooping to one side. I probably should have pinned it in place because I was moving it around at the bottom. But again, another like thing to finesse for next time. So I used to have this hem gauge tool standing ruler thing, and I must have just given it to someone along with the fucking sleeve board ironing board I used to have, because I didn't think I'd ever get to a place where I would need that type of sewing tool, and here I am, a much better sewist than I used to be, and I regret handing those off. Hopefully they're getting used at least by whoever I gave them to, but I was like, what would I ever need a sleeve board for? A bunch of things, because I have found myself thinking, this job calls for, oh right, I don't have it anymore. Anyway, so I found a dowel and then realized that was not going to be tall enough. I could have lowered my dress form to make this work, but I just went and stole one of my partner's measuring sticks. I love this one because it folds out, so you don't have to store this gigantic thing. It can fold down into this like pack of cards size thing. So normally when I've done a circle skirt, I keep the circle shape around the whole bottom, which also means it's a very curvy hem to do. It has more of a specifically like 50s style to it, where the skirt Rachel Maksy's wearing in that photo feels very 70s. And I don't know why I feel this or why that is about the skirt cut. So I knew I had to do something different with the bottom of the skirt. So I found basically the highest point, which was the longest the skirt could be, made a note of where that was on the measuring tape, and then just marked a ton of points all around. I did so much chalking because I wanted to really take my time with it and not waste all of the effort I've put into this so far. Almost cut the skirt in a very bad way accidentally because I was being a ham-fisted ogre, but then once I started trimming the bottom, I actually had a lot of fun doing this. I very much enjoyed this part. I've never done this before, and maybe because it was only a half circle skirt and not like a long length of fabric, it didn't feel too tedious to do this. But I just took a pair of scissors and cut along all of those chalk marks and evened out the bottom. And then once I got that done, I kind of lined up my eye level with the bottom of the skirt and looked if there were any obvious spots that didn't look even, if there was a bit that was sticking down, and I trimmed like a little bit here and there. And you can see the moment where I realized my very thrown together plan actually worked and it's looking exactly how I had hoped it would. It's so nice being able to picture something and then finally have my skills at a place I can more and more translate that to an actual garment. Like the vision and the reality are getting closer and closer as I continue to learn and practice, and it's really, really nice seeing progress like this. Then I serged the bottom of the skirt, which helped even out any other discrepancies, as I keep calling them for some reason. And then I just folded over the bottom. I intended to do it twice, but I actually was okay with how it looked with just the one fold up. And also there's still some curve to this hem, just not as extreme as like a full circle skirt where I actually keep the bottom of the skirt the same length all the way around. So I folded that up once and then gave it a really nice press. Take your time going over it with a bunch of steam. It flattened out beautifully and there weren't any creases or puckers or weirdnesses on the hem. It just looked really nice. And then it was time to try it on and it fit great and it looks exactly how I hoped it would. And I can't believe I was able to make this. Like, I saw a skirt that I really, really liked, and I quickly realized that the style A-line I made in the first couple videos were not this style skirt. But I'm still glad I did the practice and learning and got through some button plackets and kind of refreshed my knowledge about how to do that. So that felt very good. I'm very proud of the work I've been doing so far this year because it's clear I'm leveling up from even where I was last year. And the way that the back looks, how everything lines up, I'm so glad I took the time to do that because yeah, that'd be something that'd drive me nuts wearing it, I think. And the way the center line looks on the front and it swooshes just enough, I am so pumped. This project felt very, very good to do. I hope this was remotely helpful. I feel like this was a particularly chaotic one for some reason, but I also came out with such a good end result. Whoops, my alarm's been going off while I've been filming and I've just blindly hit snooze on it and I just realized it's been an hour since it was going off. So I finally went to go do the thing that the alarm was for. I have so many alarms for so many things. That's what runs my life. And I'm just so thankful for smartphones for just that. Even if I couldn't go on the internet with it, at least it helps me remember to do the shit I'm absolutely gonna forget otherwise. Now I realize this one isn't a button up, but what I liked about this skirt is the like drape to it and we got there. We did it. Ah. Feels so good. I can tell all the self-work I've been doing is working because I'm actually letting myself kind of revel in the victory here and the good work that I did, not just look at the faults and everything and say, oh, it looks good, except this, this, and this about it. I can acknowledge that this came out well, and that feels pretty darn good. And I get to be at this point in my sewing journey because of the support I get from everybody over on my Patreon. Y'all are incredible and will never be over the fact that this is part of my work that I get to do as a person. It is the biggest privilege in the world and I'm just so thankful to have so many of y'all rooting for me is what it feels like. Oh, and thank you everyone for coming to the live stream that I did last week. I will try to give more of a heads up for the next one. My plan is to go back to doing them monthly. I had to take almost all of last year off from doing live streams because just everything was bad. But I had a lovely time. It was so nice getting to catch up with a bunch of y'all. If y'all have any preferences for what day of the week and time I do it, obviously I got to take my schedule into account for this, but I'll try to mix it up for when I do it if y'all need me to. I think that's gonna do it for me. I would present Bert to you, but it is 0 degrees outside and he is not coming out of his cat tent. So I'll refer to last week's project where it was just Bert-rific to the max, where he was also hiding in his cat tent, but I did exploit his cuteness for views, so I'm so thankful he tolerates my shit. But I'm gonna go. I hope you all are having a good start to your February. I will see you back here with another video next Friday. Thank you so much for hanging out. Every time I make a point, she makes a quarter point.